In this video, we're going to discuss how to find a midpoint and what exactly is a midpoint. So, a midpoint is a point that lies directly halfway between the endpoints of a segment. Let's take a look at this segment. And I'm going to name this segment AB. One endpoint being A and one endpoint being B. The midpoint is halfway between A and B. So we're going to go ahead and calculate that. Measuring this, I get that from A to B is 9 inches. So the midpoint would lie at 4.5 inches, because 9 divided by 2 equals 4.5. So our midpoint X is at 4.5 inches along this line. So that means the distance between A and X is 4.5. And the distance between X and B is also 4.5. Well, what this is saying is that the measure of the segment AX is equal to the measure of the segment XB. And we can see that because both of them are 4.5 inches. So a midpoint is a point that's halfway between the endpoints. You can also think of a midpoint as a point that divides one segment into two equal lengths, or two equal segments. On a number line, it's easy to find the midpoint. The midpoint is just halfway between these 2 points. So if A is at 1 and B is at 5, I just need to add those 2 points together and then divide by 2 to find the middle point. So 1 plus 5 and divided by 2, because I want it halfway between those 2 points. 1 plus 5 is 6. All over 2 is going to give me 3. So the midpoint is at 3. And we'll go ahead and label that X. But let's say I didn't have these numbers on the number line. And A and B represented some other space, and A and B represented some other point on the number line. The formula is still essentially the same. I'm going to take where A is. Let's say that point A falls on the line at some number that we're going to represent with the variable little a. And point B falls on the line at some number we're going to represent with little b. Well, just how we added the 1 and 5 together, we're going to add wherever A falls and wherever B falls together, and still divide by 2, because we want to find the midpoint between those two. So A plus B over 2 is the formula for finding the midpoint on a number line, where A represents where one point is, and B represents where the other point is, finding the midpoint between those two. Finding a midpoint on a line on a coordinate plane is a little different. Instead of working only in one direction, we have to work in both the horizontal and the vertical. So if we were to draw a line, point A and point B, and connected those, we wish to find the midpoint between the two. B falls at coordinate 2, 0, and A falls at coordinate 0, -2. So to find the midpoint, we're going to add the x coordinates together and divide by 2, and then the y coordinates together and divide by 2. And those will give us our x and y coordinates for the midpoint, respectively. So, x coordinates first, 0 plus 2, all over 2. That will be our new x coordinate, followed by our y coordinate. Negative 2 plus 0, all over 2. 0 plus 2 over 2 is going to be 2 over 2. Negative 2 plus 0 over 2 is going to be negative 2 over 2. This is going to give us 1, negative 1. So go over 1 and down 1, and we have our midpoint x. A basic formula for midpoint on a coordinate plane would be x1 plus x2, so the coordinate of one endpoint and the coordinate of the other endpoint, all over 2, and that's your x coordinate of your new midpoint. And then y1 plus y2, all over 2. That's your y coordinate of one endpoint and your y coordinate of another endpoint divided by 2. So your midpoint is equal to the coordinate x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. Those are your new x and y values for your midpoint. This looks similar to the formula we used in one direction, a plus b over 2. But now we're doing two directions, so we have to calculate for the horizontal direction and the vertical direction. Lastly, we're going to go over segment bisector. A segment bisector is similar to an angle bisector. An angle bisector split the angle directly in half, so that we had two equal angles. A segment bisector intersects a segment at its halfway point. So a segment bisector can be a line, a plane, or another segment, and so on. So if we have a line, let's go with A, B, and our midpoint is at X, we can have some other segment run through that. Let's name this CD, and that CD will be a segment bisector because it intersects AB at the midpoint X. We can create CD into a line. Now, line CD is a segment bisector of AB. We can also have a plane as a segment bisector. So let's say we have a plane, and we'll just name this plane R. And we have a line segment A, B, where the midpoint is X. This plane intersects at that point X, and therefore, since X is the midpoint of AB, plane R is a segment bisector of AB.